overnight. Life just doesn't work that way. Transformation happens inch by inch. It's only when you spread out decades of photographs that you realize how much has changed. And I think that's true in our spiritual lives as well. The early church fathers, Irenaeus and Gregory of Nyssa amongst them, spoke of Christian life as an endless movement into the likeness of God. That's worth repeating. Christian life as an endless movement into the likeness of God. We're never finished. Day by day, often without realizing it, our hearts are stretched so that they can receive more and more of God's love, more of God's grace, more of God's life. God is quietly transforming every one of us. Which brings us to this guy, one of the lately recognized saints of our Episcopal calendar. During Pride Month, we're asked to remember Saint Marinos, whose feast day is June 17th. This beautiful icon was created by Tina Monroe, and I didn't see her here this morning, or I would ask her to stand up and receive our applause, because it's a beautiful piece. It hung for several years on that wall and then was gradually moved over to the bishop's parlor, or near the bishop's parlor, which I suppose is where it'll end up once again. The thing that's important to know about Marinos, a trans man, is that he was added to the Episcopal calendar in 2022, but has for a long time been honored in the Roman Catholic, Orthodox, and Coptic traditions. Marinos, who was born Marina, lived in the 5th century in what is now Lebanon. After the death of his mother, his father planned to arrange a marriage for Marina and then retire and become a monk. But Marinos had another idea. He said to his father, "Why would you save your soul at the cost of destroying mine and who I am?" So he cut his hair, he put on men's clothing, and entered the monastery along with his father as Marinos. For years, he lived faithfully as a monk. And then tragedy struck. A young woman became pregnant and falsely accused Marinos of fathering her child. Think about that situation for a moment. Marinos knew he could defend himself. He could reveal the truth about his body, but he also knew what that revelation would cost him. So he remained silent. He accepted the accusation. He accepted the shame. He accepted being expelled from the monastery. When the child was born, he raised the little boy as if he were his own, enduring years of ridicule, suspicion, and rejection. Only after Marinos died did the monks discover that the accusation had been false. Their grief was overwhelming. They realized that they had never truly seen this person who lived among them. One tradition even says that during the funeral, a monk who was blind in one eye touched Marinos' body and his sight was restored. Now, I love that image. It's not simply a miracle story, is it? It's a parable. The monks spent years seeing only half of Marinos. They saw what they assumed. They saw what fit their expectations. Only after his death did they begin to see the whole person who had been living among them all along. I wonder how often that happens today. How often do we think we know someone's story when we really only know a tiny bit of it? How often do LGBTQ plus people carry assumptions that others place upon them? How often do people remain silent because telling the truth about themselves feels too dangerous? How often are people judged before they are ever known? But if we're honest, this isn't just a story for LGBT folks. Every one of us knows what it feels like to be misunderstood. Every one of us has parts of ourselves that remain hidden. Every one of us longs to be known, not simply for what people see on the outside, but for who God knows us to be. And that brings us to Jesus' little parable. It may well be the shortest story he ever told. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. End of story. That's it. That's the parable. But the important word that's in there is hidden. In a lot of the English translations, usually says mixed, that the leaven was mixed or the yeast was mixed into the flour. But the Greek suggests something more like she hid it, she buried it. Once the yeast disappears into the dough, you can't see it anymore. It vanishes. And yet, it's doing its most important work. Tiny cells begin feeding on sugars. Little bubbles begin forming. The dough slowly rises, not dramatically, not all at once, quietly, patiently, relentlessly. And Jesus said, that's what the kingdom of God is like. God's work is often hidden before it becomes visible. And it's easy for us to get discouraged. Those of us who believe that God's table is wide enough for everyone sometimes wonder whether our efforts matter at all. We work for justice. We advocate radical hospitality for all. We try to build communities where every person knows that they belong. Meanwhile, some of the loudest Christian voices often seem trapped in fear and exclusion. Sometimes it feels like nothing is changing. But yeast never looks really impressive while it's working. It just keeps transforming the dough. And did you notice how much flour there is? 3 measures isn't just enough for one family. It's something like 40 or 50 pounds of flour, enough to feed bread to the whole community. Jesus' point is that something incredibly small produces something unimaginably large. The kingdom grows that way. One act of welcome, one word of kindness, one courageous conversation, one person choosing compassion over judgment, one saint raising a child who wasn't even his own. Small things, hidden things, kingdom things. They don't always make headlines, but they change the world. That's why I don't think the story of Marinus is only about one remarkable transgender saint. It's about every follower of Jesus. Every Christian is called to trust the hidden work of God. Every Christian is called to resist making assumptions about other people. Every Christian is called to become more fully the person that God created us to be. Every Christian is called to make room for someone else at God's table. And here's the wonderful thing. The kingdom doesn't rely solely on us. Jesus doesn't say we're the yeast, thank God. He says the kingdom is like the yeast. God's already at work. It isn't our task to manufacture the kingdom. Our task is to cooperate with it, to trust it, to become part of what God is already doing. Like those old family photographs, we cannot often see the changes while they're happening. Only years later do we realize how much grace has quietly been at work. Perhaps the church will one day look back on this day, this moment, the way I look back through those boxes of photographs. Perhaps we'll discover that while we're busy worrying that nothing much was happening in the way of progress, God has been patiently raising the dough all along, changing hearts, opening minds, healing wounds, stretching our capacity to receive more and more of God's love, until little by little, hidden grace has transformed us into people who look a little bit more like Jesus. And isn't that what every saint, including Marinus, has always been trying to show us? The kingdom often begins in hidden, small ways, but by God's grace, it never stays small.